Well, Bob, we've been trying to get our guest for a long time. We wanted to have him at the Christmas holiday time so we could talk about a wonderful Shakespeare production he directed in the fall, but we couldn't quite get our signals together. But by delaying, we can now talk about another wonderful production that he just did. Welcome, Bruce Longworth, who directed The Winter's Tale for Shakespeare Festival St. Louis.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me. And I want to thank you both for all that you do for fostering and encouraging theater in St. Louis.
Well, thank you.
Well,
we
thank
got
you.
we got the good stuff. We got to just go sit and watch and talk about it a little. So thank you, though.
So The Winter's Tale, that's not one of the plays with, shall we say, the most name recognition among Shakespeare. How did that get to be chosen for the biggest Shakespeare production of the year?
I think there were a couple of things in consideration. One is that we try to switch it up every year in terms of whether it's a comedy, a tragedy, a romance, a history. And we were coming off Midsummer Night's Dream. And before that was A&C, and before that were the Henrys. And we hadn't done a romance for quite a while. Tempest was the last we did. I love The Winter's Tale, so I pitched it pretty hard. And Rick Dildine was gracious enough to support that.
Yeah, so it was, it happens to be my favorite too.
And one of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You guys. I don't think Shakespeare got it right until The Tempest. But anyway.
But so this play has this really big problem at the start, which is King Leontes becomes jealous almost, just a few seconds after it starts, and it doesn't really seem to come from anywhere. And I have friends who can never accept that. So how did you approach making that something that the audience could accept?
We thought about a couple of things. One, I took the title literally. That it's The Winter's Tale. It's a tale, not a story. And a tale, by definition, I think, has elements that challenge belief. We still talk about tall tales. We don't talk about tall stories. And that gave rise to the framing device of starting the production today and then flashing back to the Regency period. And I approached it like a story that was told around a fire. And it had a lot of things that would challenge your belief.
In spite of the framing story being
You're
composed, it was all Shakespeare too.
Yes, it was all Shakespeare. But you're right, that Shakespeare doesn't spend any time explaining how Leontes comes to the conclusion that his wife is being unfaithful. He just comes to that conclusion. I mean, there are little things in the script. The speech right before he kind of comes back into the action. His wife is telling his best friend, okay, I'll understand what you're saying about women if you only sinned with your wife and with no one else. If you just hear that speech in isolation, it can sound like a woman who is talking to a lover about the affair they are having, and she's checking to make sure that he's not sleeping with any other women. So there's a little bit in the script.
But of course, there's nothing in Shakespeare's script that says, well, Leontes is away for that part
No.
of it, and then he comes back just in time. But that's kind of how you did it.
There's nothing explicit in the script,
Yeah.
but I think that it is implicit in the script that he hears the beginning of their exchange. He says, come, my wife, talk him into staying, and then he comes back and says, so is he going to stay? Which to me meant he couldn't hear the entire exchange. And so the question is, what takes him away? And what took him away was business, because his major domo, Camillo, was there with an agenda, with the daily agenda of what's next in the meetings, and kind of walking him through his day. So we had to move him out of the frame for a while so that when he came back in, he had missed some things, which I think helps kind of understand that he's trying to catch what's going on the bounce. And it makes it a little easier for him to misunderstand what has occurred.
Your Leontes, I thought, did a wonderful job of building gradation into what's happening inside Leontes' mind there.
Yeah, Charlie is a tremendous actor. He's got tremendous skills. He's got a huge crayon box, and he can do pretty much anything you ask him to do. And he was very aware that it's easy in this character to kind of hit the same level over and over again, which becomes pretty tiresome. So he did a great job of carving variety and nuance into moment to moment, of keeping it active, of keeping the story unfolding and changing. I mean, Shakespeare writes a real challenge in that second scene, which for us was the first scene because I cut his first scene. It is full of fireworks. That whole scene between he and Camillo is just all fireworks, and you're 10 minutes into the play. And on the one hand, you go, this is great. How exciting for the audience. On the other hand, if you're the actor playing Leontes, you're going, okay, how am I going to top this? I'm going to tap out in the first 10 minutes, and then I've got another 2 hours. So Charlie did a great job of leaning into what the scene asked him to do, and still left more to uncover in the ensuing scenes.
Yeah, that Leontes is one of the two roles with extraordinary challenges in this play. The other one is Paulina, who again could suffer the problem of being one note scold kind of character, but your Paulina was really amazing.
Yeah, I was blessed with great actors, and Rachel is incredibly smart and very, very talented. She did a great job of finding the balance, that Paulina is powerful, she's intelligent, she has the guts to speak truth to power. She's also smart enough to know when she's gone too far. She's aware of the stakes and the consequence of her actions, which makes the choices of the character exciting as opposed to foolhardy.
Yeah, one of the things that just amazed me was that in a confrontation scene between Paulina and Leontes, the audience laughed at what she was saying. It was laughing at truth being told to power. I would have never expected laughter there, even though I've read the play many times, but it seemed completely right when I heard it.
Yeah, I suspected that we would get some laughs. We got a few more than I thought we would. What I didn't know is that on occasion we would get people clapping and cheering at her lines, which caught me by surprise, and I thought it was great. It was a great response.
Well, but it was that kind of laughter. They weren't laughing at her.
No.
They were laughing more at Leontes.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
No, their response was in support
and
of her.
it was the pleasure in her, what she was doing, that caused the laughter and then the applause.
And it was great because I think it for me, it validated that the audience understood, from the get-go, that Leontes was wrong.
Yeah.
That he had the wrong end of the stick. His wife was not having an affair. And we spent a lot of time in that first scene in the section with Hermione and Polixenes, of how close they could get when they were talking privately, how close they could get, could they touch? If they did touch, how could they touch? Because we had moments early on when I would look at it going, okay, I would think she's having an affair. They're touching each other too much. They're too close in proximity. So we spent a lot of time finding what is the ideal distance, what are the physical contacts, and they all had to be out of concern and care or manners as opposed to intimacy.
Yeah. Lead Leontes astray, but not the audience.
That's exactly right. Because you didn't want the audience sitting there going, okay, is she having an affair or is she not? And I think that we got it right. I think the audience understood clearly, based on their reactions to Paulina in that basket scene, based on their reaction when the oracle is revealed and the court officer says Leontes is a jealous tyrant, and the audience invariably reacted to that. They understood.
It was so important to have the audience with Paulina for what happens afterwards, because she is very strict in her dealings with Leontes. And for the audience to be with Paulina when she's doing that, I thought was great.
Right, because you've got to understand why she waits 16 years.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that she's following the oracle, that this story cannot be changed until the daughter is found. And so she's obeying God by doing that. But also, she's waiting for, the signs that Leontes has been truly repentant. And given what he's done, that can't be a week after the trial. It ends up taking 16 years.
Yeah. That's interesting. You're talking about a tall tale in a way, to have the oracle, something believed in it. We have to accept that as the tale.
Now you return to your framing story at the beginning of your second act for that famous speech about time. And for me, that really worked beautifully. Was that kind of in your mind when you developed the frame of returning to the frame there?
It was a domino from the beginning of the first act. When I decided that I wanted to frame this as a story, and begin today with a father, a mother, and a daughter who, kind of resembled the father, mother, and daughter in the play. I knew I didn't want it to be a one-off because I felt that the audience it would seem directorial. If it was just to kind of launch the ship, it would seem very directorial, that it had to be integral to the play. So I thought it had to come back one more time. So then the question was when. The obvious answer was the dad would be time, because the dad is the storyteller. And time functions as a storyteller. In that speech, he says, we're going to skip over 16 years, we're going to shift countries and go to Bohemia. And I love that we came up scenically with a way to tell the story. I love the fact that the daughter then steps into the play as Perdita. I think when stories are told well, we imagine ourselves in the stories. And sometimes we imagine ourselves as a particular character in the story because we identify with one character or another. And when that happens, it's a good story. Yeah. And so having people walk into the story, I was hoping would help the audience identify with it. But it also then allowed me to say that the framing device here, it is integral to how this story is being told. It's just not kind of a choice the director made to launch the beginning of the play.
Why did you have the dancing at that point?
At the top of the second act?
Yeah.
Well, I began the play.
The father and daughter dancing.
I like the idea. This is because I'm a dad.
Okay.
I like the idea that the play began with a dad thinking he was by himself with his paper and his cup of coffee. He doesn't know his daughter is going to arrive. And he's doing what dads do when they think they're alone, or at least what I have done, is that he's listening to his music and he starts to bop. And he doesn't dance particularly well, which Charlie danced not well, very well. So that when the mom and the daughter come in and they look at him, they're like, oh my gosh, if he knew that he was being watched, he'd be embarrassed. Yeah. I like the idea that came back at the top of the second act, where he loves his daughter, he loves the music she listens to. He's learned, the Bruno Mars video, and it's a thing between them. I thought it set up a nice relationship between father and daughter that began in the first act, because I think she finds his dancing very charming. Yeah. But then we get to see them do something together, which I thought furthered the relationship between a father and a daughter. I thought it echoed a relationship that you wanted to see Leontes have with his daughter Perdita, should he be offered the chance to have that relationship.
Now, if there's one thing that The Winter's Tale is famous for, it's that stage direction.
Yeah.
Exit pursued by a bear.
Yeah.
So how did you decide how you were going to do the bear?
That's a haunting stage direction because, boy, you can go wrong a lot of ways.
But you didn't.
Well, thank you. I mean, we talked about it. We talked about it a lot. I didn't want it to be a moment that got a laugh, and it can easily get a laugh. Yeah. And it's probably not the end of the world if it does, but I didn't want it to be a moment that got a laugh. I had chosen a storytelling device for the play, and so I thought, okay, the way to do this is to do it in a storytelling way, which to me meant that it shouldn't be kind of realistic in any way. I didn't want a guy in a bear suit, because that would approach realism, but I think invariably would be kind of funny. So we settled on this being a silhouette, which to me was an extension of a storytelling device. Between John Wiley, the lighting designer, and Rusty Wandel, the sound designer, I mean, they came up with a tremendously kind of scary, loud landscape of that bear, which I think squashed the laughter and made this a kind of a terrifying moment. But seeing it in silhouette allowed us to understand what was happening. I thought it was visually interesting and dynamic, but it didn't kind of take us into territory where we were trying to do it realistically and invariably would fail. And I have to say that the night we teched it, right after we teched it and kind of all the sound was done and we stopped, the bears at the zoo started to call out.
Really?
Yeah, it was great. And I felt both excited and guilty. I felt guilty because I thought they probably were upset. Yeah. Because our bear sounded really upset, and kind of delighted that they were clearly responding to what they heard
Was that the
that's
only time
wonderful.
it happened?
Yeah, that's the only time I tracked it.
Oh,
We heard the sea lions a whole lot, but
Yeah?
when it happened that night, I went, okay, are
interesting.
those the sea lions? And I realized, no, they're not. They sound different, and realized they were the bears.
Now, another time there was a pause that I didn't expect on opening night was when the lights came on and suddenly revealed the Bohemia set at the rear. You got such a great change of scenery without really having to do very much. How did that come about?
Well, Scott Neal, who designed the show, did a great job. We went into the process, and I said, I'd love us to be able to have a large scenic change as we go from Sicilia to Bohemia. We need a set that will serve both countries. We need a set that serves both kind of a contemporary framing device and a flashback to the 19th century. So Scott, can you make all that happen?
Yeah, well, he did.
And he did. He went away, and what he came back with was, we could do this. And I said, that's great. I love
And
it.
it really worked.
Yeah. And again, it also, I think, then felt like it was a story being told.
Yeah. Now, at the end of that play is what I consider to be the most magical scene in all of Shakespeare. And you, I think in Shakespeare's day, this would have worked very well in his indoor Blackfriars Theater. And you were in the largest venue in town, except perhaps for the Muni, but you had people you had to reach who were all the way at the top of the hill in Shakespeare Glen. So how did you approach that scene, knowing that it was going to be in such a huge space?
We did a couple of things. I mean, it's also, I think, a difficult scene out there because it's a fairly still scene. There's not much movement.
Right.
And in the park, on that scale, when nobody moves for a length of time, it starts to seem like a radio event. Because you're hearing the actors amplified through the speakers. It's easy to tell who's speaking if they're gesturing when they're speaking, but if everybody's still, you start hearing voices and go, okay, who is talking? So that was a bit of a challenge, but the scene has got to be primarily still, just by virtue of what happens. So we kind of leaned into that. The statue is the statue, so we leaned into that. It was important to me that after the final line that we still needed to see a moment of Leontes' repentance, and we need to see that forgiveness is offered and gratefully accepted. So that's what you saw after the final line that Shakespeare wrote. The music at that time was very different than any music we had heard throughout the evening, which I think took us to another place. That was not kind of bound in realism, and again kind of supported the idea that we were going someplace that was, to use your word, magical, because I think repentance offered and received is a miracle, and has a magic to it, and it was important to me that everything in that moment support that idea of the size of the repentance.
Well, from magic, I think we have to go to witchcraft to talk a little bit about your Macbeth that you did at Webster University last November, which I thought was brilliant, and it did something that I had never seen, never happened to me before, which is I understood the changes in the characters at the end as something organic rather than a huge rift in the middle of the play that I never understood. And could you talk a little bit about how that happened?
There were a couple of things that influenced me a lot putting that together. One was that we had a young company. It's undergraduates, and I wanted to take advantage of having a young company, which led me to think, okay, what kind of character is Macbeth? And having a young man play it, Mike Andrews, who did a great job, we thought of him as a battle commander. A man who is his age. And I pretty much, the first day I said, okay, most of you, I want you to think of the characters as your age. There are a couple of exceptions, and we talked about that. But by and large, the characters you're playing are your age, which is also why I set it in period 11th century, that you could believe that a 21-year-old could rise to that level of prominence because lifespan was not that great. They learned fast and they performed well. But I wanted to take advantage of the fact that it was a young battle commander. He was used to making split-second decisions. That's what he excelled at. So he would see a problem, make a choice, course correct, execute, go forward. He was not someone who was a chess player. He did not see 12 moves in advance. He saw one move in advance. So every time Macbeth encounters a problem, he assesses it, he makes a choice. By the time he realizes that he's made 5 bad choices, he's so far in that he's got to continue to make choices to try to dig himself out, and he just fails. And so that was predicated on having a young company. The other thing that influenced me was an essay that I read that talked about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth being the happiest married couple in the canon. And initially I went, oh no, come on. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, that really is interesting. And there's a lot in that. I think that the essayist was right. We don't get to see a whole lot of it. We get to see it at the very, very beginning in their first scene. But I thought, what if we can tell a story about a happily married couple who together make a lot of horrible choices, which fractures their relationship and their world. And the third thing that was in my mind putting that together was how to approach the witches, because I think the play's got to be a tragedy, which to me means that the witches can tempt and seduce, but they cannot control.
Yeah.
If they control everything, then Macbeth is just a sap who was doomed at the beginning. He's a puppet, and they're the puppet masters.
That's very interesting you say that, because I noted as I was watching Witches, there were times when they themselves were totally out of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're making it up as they go along. I think what they know is that they want to make this guy's life a disaster, because it's what they enjoy, but they don't know how. And it comes up in the moment, and they make decisions in the moment. Yeah. And what they can do is tease and tempt and suborn, and then watch and see if he'll make a choice that's based on that, and then they take great delight in the choices he makes.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce, I have a list of about 11 or 12 plays that I wanted to ask you about, but our time is up, and we've only gotten to 2, so I think we're going to have you back as a guest, because it has just been delightful to hear the thought that goes into your interpretation. I mean, I knew it had to be there, but it's really interesting to hear what it is.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I'm sorry Winter's Tale is closed. I want to go see it again.
Me too.
Thank you so much for
coming.
Thank you.
It's been great.